I have been wearing the Tandem Mobi insulin pump for about 3 months now. It is the smallest hybrid closed loop tubed pump in the US. I mean, look at it. It is a tiny little thing. Today, I wanted to dive deeper into its algorithm, my favorite features about it, and some tips and tricks with it, and talk about what my transition from tubeless to tubed has been like. Welcome to Diabetic Tech. I'm Justin. I have type 1 diabetes, and on here I talk all things diabetes tech, news, and research. Today I'm joined by diabetes educator David Mina, who lives with type 1 himself and uses the Tandem Mobi. He helps train patients on a wide range of insulin pumps, including the Mobi. We get into why he became a diabetes educator, his experience with different pumps over the years, and why he chooses to still use Tandem. We also break down the Tandem algorithm, how it works, the updates with Control IQ Plus, and what people should know before switching. I share my take on what the transition from an Omnipod tubeless pump to a tube pump, what that was like. It's been quite challenging, as well as my love for the Mobi quick bolus button. This thing is so much fun to use. And then we also get into some excitement we have over the Twist insulin pump that is coming very soon. This is just the beginning for my Mobi content. There's already a site change video up on YouTube. I've got an app walkthrough video coming up, as well as a video where I dive deeper into my transition from tubeless to tubed. I'm going back to tubed. And then also a review of the Tandem Mobi that will be coming soon. So make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel so you get updated as soon as that releases. Keep in mind that all of my episodes are not medical advice and are for educational purposes only. Always consult with a physician before making changes to your healthcare. Let's get into it. Dave, welcome to the show. Good to have you here. How's it going?
Thank you for having me. I'm good. I'm good. Very excited to be here.
Yeah, you work at the same office as David On, right?
I do. I do.
How well do you know him?
Pretty well. I've been working with him for about 2 years now, and we've been good friends also before then. So
Okay.
pretty comfortable. Very cool working with him, learning a lot from him daily. So that's great.
Yeah, he's a crowd favorite on this show. I love having him on. Like whenever there's a conference, him and I will get together and talk about like what we saw there and geek
Yeah.
out. It's always fun talking to him. But more about you. You were diagnosed at 11 years old,
Yes.
and now you are a certified diabetes educator. Tell me about what inspired you to choose that line of work.
Well, like you said, was diagnosed at 11, so I was in the sixth grade. Very new concept to me. I didn't know anybody in my life personally living with diabetes at all, but let alone type 1. So it was very new to me, very shocking, obviously, to me and my family, and just learning that news at first. So I think my experience being introduced to diabetes, I will say, did not start off on the best foot. I was very confused, very scared. Why is this happening to me? You're 11, you want to just be a normal kid, be with your friends, go, to school, do all of those things. And now I had to relearn. I feel I had to relearn life in a way and how to incorporate diabetes into my life. So I will say I went through a couple of burnout periods throughout my first couple of years with diabetes. Had the highest A1C I had ever hit, maybe about 2, 3 years afterwards. And there was a point when I went to my endocrinologist for my 3 month appointment. And my diabetes educator actually is the one who came in and pretty much gave me this fear factor lecture telling me, if you don't get a grip on your diabetes, you're going to have X amount of complications later on in life. And that really impacted me. It made me want to change my habits. I was going for long periods of time where I would be afraid to take insulin at school because I was afraid of going low. Very,
Yeah.
embarrassed back then that I had this thing called diabetes that no other kid at my school had. And so that is a lot where the behavioral elements came from. And from that moment, right after that appointment, I changed my ways. I said, I'm going to move forward on a positive note, and I'm going to take control over this thing. So that was a very pivotal moment in my whole journey with diabetes that really spoke to me and made me want to do something, not only for myself, but for others. I think that experience that my educator and I shared, where it was not the most positive experience, it taught me that I want to be that person to somebody, but handle it in a different way, essentially. I want to um, go into a room with a patient and give them proper education and allow them to feel that they know they have the resources available to them, and here's how we can get to that point together. I never want somebody to feel that they have to manage this disease alone. So that was a very, like I said, pivotal moment in my life that really spoke to me and made me want to do something more with my diabetes.
Yeah, that's so cool to hear. I mean, my diabetes educator has been one of the most pivotal people in my care. And I always tell people when they come to me and they're having problems or they feel really lost, I'm like, get a diabetes educator. Go find one. They are what mine said to me was, she was like, I am your diabetes therapist. You can come in, you can talk about whatever you want. It's all related to diabetes. It's all going to be in some way, that struggle, that whatever it is, that stress, it's all connected. And she's made me, the carb counter I am. And I'm so grateful for her. And I'm grateful for people like you that help other people too. And I try to offer my own education too when it comes to at least the technology that's available. And then
Yeah,
they can go over to you and then, learn how to use it and ask about it. You help people get on all pumps, right? Or a lot of different
pretty
pumps.
much, yes. Like I always say, I like to meet patients where they're at. So, at the point where they come see me, they've already made the decision they want to start insulin pump therapy. And so, depending on which device they choose, it can be, just using CGM, it could be using pump therapy with CGM, you name it. There are a lot of great options out there these days. So, we usually just let them choose, and then I'm able to train them on the device that they choose. And I really want to instill confidence in them that they know they can use these devices in their own lifestyle. You have to choose a device that fits your lifestyle. So yeah, that's usually how it goes when we have a training.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've heard of the new twist pump coming out. Have you been trained on that yet? Or are there plans to get trained? Like, it is
Yeah,
happening. I just went to Manchester, New Hampshire, and I saw them in the production line being built. It was so cool. Dean Kamen, the inventor of the pump and the original, like the first wearable
yeah.
pump ever. He took me on a tour, which was like so cool. But I'm excited for this. What are your thoughts on
Yeah,
it?
I actually have been having conversations with our reps here locally, and so it's been really exciting learning about the technology. Very, very interested in how it's going to work, as pump therapy compared to the options we have nowadays. I think each device coming out nowadays is just getting better and better. A lot of features that I feel the diabetes community has been voicing what they want out of a system, and I think I'm seeing a lot of that being placed into these new devices, such as the twist pump. So, yeah, very excited. In the process of getting certified to train on those, but we haven't fully started training yet. So, more to come on that, but very excited and yeah, always ready to learn more about all the systems.
Yeah, they all have their pros and cons. And I've experienced that firsthand after wearing Omnipod for the last 3 years, using both Omnipod 5, the FDA cleared platform, and then using DIY systems. I've been able to experience all those, and then switching over to Tandem Mobi for a few months, which inspired this conversation. And I want to get as much information as I can out of you of, the ways you're using it, the ways you speak to patients about it, because there are so many factors of the Mobi that I found to be really beneficial. But I've also had moments with it where I struggle or I'm frustrated about whether it be lifestyle experiences with it, but also just like understanding the platform or getting it to work the way I want to. And I've worked with my educator, but I don't know. There's just been a lot of like back and forth of how I feel about it. But before we get into Tandem Mobi, I want to get an understanding of some of the pumps that you've used leading up to
Yeah.
Tandem Mobi.
So I, like we said at the beginning, have been living with diabetes since the age of 11. So it's been about 16 years now. I went my first year with diabetes doing completely, MDI. And then after that, I started my first insulin pump way back when it was a Medtronic pump, one of the very first models available. I did that for a few years and then I switched over to the Animus Vibe, no longer available, but that was a great pump. I really enjoyed it. Um,
I hear people
yeah,
loved that
it was
pump.
very, very, I feel user friendly is a good word to say. I felt,
Did you use the Clio infusion set with that?
ooh, I don't remember
Yeah,
honestly.
it's far back.
They were very
Okay.
similar infusion sets. I think back then I was still using steel cannulas, I remember. So a
Okay.
little bit different. But yeah, I did the Animus Vibe for some time. That was when CGM was starting to become a thing too. So we started seeing that integrated into the insulin pump. It wasn't, a closed loop system or anything, but what was nice is you could see your Dexcom readings on your pump. When you would go initiate a bolus, it would automatically populate. So I felt it helped a lot just having two devices in one essentially. And then I switched over to, once my warranty ended with that, and I found out Animus Vibe was no longer, I switched over to Tandem T Slim. Did that for a good few years, and then as of recently, within the past year, switched to the Mobi. So that has been my, journey with insulin pump therapy. So I've been on a pump for about 15 years total, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more within our conversation. But it's been, a lot of learning. But I find that each system I switch over to, it's only getting better and better with the technology and the progression we're seeing in pump therapy. All the features that are being incorporated into these systems are just making things so much easier to live with diabetes. And it's something, obviously, you and I are both, I'm sure, very, very grateful for to have, because it does provide a sense of luxury in a way to live with diabetes. And that's something I'm fully, aware of and grateful to have.
Yeah, I feel so fortunate to have an automated system and fortunate to have been diagnosed at a time where that was ready for me. I mean, at least in the DIY space, it was maybe a year after my diagnosis that FDA cleared systems started having loop or closed loop systems. But I didn't have to go through the years that you did of not knowing or not having the CGM levels connected to a pump. I don't want to have imagined that. So I'm grateful for that. You know, you had this big decision when T Slim's contract went up. You moved over to Mobi. Why do you decide to stay in that Control IQ ecosystem?
Like I said, I always tell patients you have to find a system that works well in your lifestyle. So when I applied that to my own life with diabetes, I found that the Mobi made sense to me, and especially having that same algorithm that I'm so used to with the T Slim. I've been on the T Slim for about 4 or 5 years. And so when, it came time to switch over to the Mobi, I felt like I've had a good grasp on my diabetes in a sense with having Control IQ. I found the Control IQ element helped me live my lifestyle. I'm a busy person. I'm out of the house for 12, 13 hours a day at times. And so it's just a lot of go, 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 where I find I need a system that I find can be essentially like an assistant or a sidekick to me in managing my diabetes. And I find Control IQ is very helpful for that. It has a lot of features in the system that I find I use often to help me optimize the system, manage my diabetes, and achieve the goals that I have for myself. So, that can come from temp basals, that can come from, the system deciding to decrease or increase my basal rates to prevent moments where I would normally pause and have to treat my diabetes. So,
Have you ever thought about just trying out Omnipod for a short amount of time. I mean, it's pharmacy benefits. It doesn't necessarily affect your contract with Mobi. Have you ever considered, or have you tried on a tubeless pump for a month or two just to see what that experience
Yeah,
is
great
like?
question. I actually, that is one of the few pumps I have not tried yet. I remember before I switched over to my T Slim pump, it was between the T Slim and the Omnipod. And, back then, I remember the plan that I had, my insurance plan, could only cover the T Slim. So that's why I moved forward with that. But, I'm glad I made that decision, obviously. But there was a period of time where I was wanting fully, tubeless pump therapy and having that freedom where I'm not connected to a device or a tubing. But then, part of my decision was I realized I've been on a pump for, at this point now, 15 years, and they've only ever been tubed pumps. So that's all I really know. I'm very comfortable with it. And then now kind of having the Mobi where you could do, make it a patch pump if you wanted, or you could wear it as a tubed pump. It gives me that option. So yes, I've been very interested to try Omnipod, just as, experience, just to see how it works fully and, compare the two with their algorithms. But I think both are great options. And I do love that it is a pharmacy benefit too. So it is more accessible.
I had an interesting experience switching from Omnipod to Mobi for this little experiment, and I wasn't ready for this. Like, I didn't realize it would challenge me this much, but you know, I've been so spoiled by Omnipod being just like kind of on me and going through my everyday routine, not even thinking about it being on me, really forgetting it's there, and then starting a tube pump when I go to shower, needing to not only detach it from it, but also go find my phone so that I can stop
Yeah.
insulin delivery. So every time I'm going to shower, I have to go find my phone, which is, something I didn't have to do. Going and sitting on the toilet and then either pulling my clipped pump and like it almost like hurting, like a little bit, or it dropping to
Mhm.
the ground and like needing to catch it, just like this dangling thing coming off of me, or like the worst, somehow like when I'm switching outfits or like coming out of the shower and I guess I put the tube back on, getting dressed and like using one hand to hold
Yep.
my shorts and my other hand to hold the pump. I'm like, oh
Yeah,
my goodness. Like that was a big adjustment
absolutely.
for me in that realm. And then the other thing that was a bit of an adjustment for me is, I just lived on an island off of Brazil, Florianopolis, beautiful place, and I was wearing Speedos a lot. And having this like tube coming out or wearing this little
Mhm.
sack, that little
Yeah.
adhesive pouch, with my Speedo just didn't feel, and I hate that I
Yeah.
felt this way. I hate it, but it's true. Like, I just didn't feel as confident in the way I looked
Mhm.
with it. And I hate that, and I hate that I say that, because I am a confident person. I'm proud of who I am and my diabetes, but it was just a really interesting situation that I found myself in. And I actually documented all of these
Yeah.
feelings and experiences in a YouTube video that is probably coming out, I think, at the end of the week that this airs. So stay tuned, everyone. But that was my experience with
Yeah.
that shift. And I don't know, I just thought I'd bring that up because these are just things I never had to experience before, but it just
Yeah.
resonated with me that like some insecurities came out for wearing it.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that because I think that is a very real point that maybe a lot of people experience with diabetes and maybe don't feel like sharing. And I think that is something that we have to incorporate into the decisions we make for how we manage our diabetes. So I know a lot of people, unfortunately, may not want to wear a pump or a CGM for reasons like that. And by all means, I mean, I always say, again, it has to work for your lifestyle. So as long as you're obviously not neglecting your diabetes care, you're still taking injections or checking your blood sugar manually, whatever works for you. But I think there are ways and there are, transition periods where you switch over, for example, from one insulin pump to another, where you might experience a moment like you did, at the beach or something. And it's the first time you're faced with that reality where it's very new to you, it's a new device, it's a new environment, and you're just now having to essentially relearn how am I going to live my life with this new device, and does it make sense for me or not? So these are all valid feelings and all very important things to consider. I think by you sharing that especially is going to help a lot of people because they won't feel alone. I mean, I've felt similar to that before, just kind of in my everyday life. Like I totally understand when you're changing, when you're showering, things like that. You have to now decide, well, where's this pump gonna go, and how am I going to operate it in these moments
Yeah.
that a lot of people wouldn't think about. So, very, very real moments.
Yeah, I feel like in those moments of using the toilet, showering, swimming, whatever it was a reminder, like a poke saying, "You
Yep.
have diabetes. You have diabetes." And I don't experience that as much with the
Yeah.
tubeless factor. And the good news is for people who feel that way too, a lot of these companies, including Tandem, are all working on a tubeless pump. So soon we're going to have so many options, and I'm sure there will still be people out there that prefer tubed. I'm wearing my Mobi. Probably for like the last day. I was gonna like take it off yesterday and put on my Omnipod before I return it, but I was like, well, I should wear it for the interview. so so I've got my Mobi on, and I'm returning it. So they had the 90-day return policy. I'm returning it
Okay.
this week, but I'm so grateful that I got to use it. I mean, this thing is
Yeah.
small. It is a tiny little. This is the smallest tube pump. It's half the size, maybe even more than half the size of T Slim, and then way smaller than Medtronic 780G. I think my favorite feature on this pump has got to be the
Yeah.
bolus button. I am obsessed with this thing. Like, and I'll tell you, I used it yesterday at the Delta Lounge. I left my phone by my computer, and I'm going to get some snacks at the buffet, and I'm like, ah, shoot, I don't have my phone. I'm like, wait a second, I don't need my phone to
Yeah.
bolus right now. And I just hold down on it and it goes here. I just hold down on it and it goes like ba ba. And then I go like 1, 2, 3. You can do up to 3, 1, 2, or 3. I'm not going to confirm it. And so what I would do is I would confirm that. And right there, that would have been 45 grams of carbs logging into it. You could do, you can program it a bunch of different ways. So that was it saying you didn't, you know, dose, which is good because otherwise I'd be low in 20 minutes. But that is hands down the coolest
Yeah.
feature for me, especially coming from the tubeless pump where Omnipod doesn't have any type of onboard controls to bolus. You need to go get your phone in order to bolus. So you really could just, be without your phone for a while, have the alerts from your pump if you go low, use that for eating, and then your Dexcom or your CGM you're using could be connected to your watch. I mean, you really could be pretty mobile from your phone, and I like to not use my phone. What would you say is your favorite feature of Mobi?
I think going back to that word I used, a personal assistant or sidekick, I just
Yeah.
find that, you know, every device I've used to manage my diabetes, I just adapt to that device. And so now I know anytime I need to make treatment decisions specific to my pump, it's all on my phone. So I really love having that option. I think my favorite feature is simply mobile bolusing. Looking back to when I was newly diagnosed and we didn't even have, yes, there was technology, but I wasn't at least using it right away. The concept of being able to deliver a bolus from my phone at the age of 11 would have been beyond me. I mean, I think that was just the coolest
Yeah.
thing. And I remember when I started on the Tandem T Slim pump, there was no mobile bolus just yet. And I remember when that update came out, I was super, super excited because, again, that concept is just very freeing to know you don't have to always pull out your device and deliver a bolus. If you're, for example, in a meeting or you're, in a situation where you can't always pull out your device or maybe you don't want to, you have that option. You can very, very discreetly look like you're texting almost, and you're really delivering a bolus. I say like you're texting your pancreas essentially. And so just kind of allowing that flow of insulin to go through and very seamlessly is very, very exciting.
This episode is sponsored by Omnipod. As someone with T1D and with an incredibly active lifestyle, it's important for me not to get tied up, especially with tubes on my insulin pump. I love to go swimming, lift weights, and play kickball with friends. And with Omnipod 5, I never have to worry about tubes getting in the way. Plus, not having to disconnect helps me to stay in range during all of my favorite physical activities. That includes sexy time too. See if you're eligible for a 30-day trial by visiting omnipod.com/diabetic. On there, you'll see full safety and risk information and trial terms. That's omnipod.com/diabetic. First, can you kind of explain to us with Control IQ what that algorithm is doing?
Absolutely. So just like it says, Control IQ, it's trying to keep you within a tight control. And so there's this graph I love going over with my new pump starts because it really simplifies the whole concept of Control IQ. Essentially, it'll show the diagram of those colored diamonds that you see on your screen. And then, different functions, what may be taking place if you see it happen on your dashboard. So usually I like to go over, the pump is trying to keep you in this maintenance mode is what I call it. And it goes to keep your glucose between a 112.5 and a 160 range. Your target glucose on the Tandem is 110, but within that 112.5 and 160 range, you're good essentially, and it's trying to keep you within that box. Anything above or below, it's going to adjust accordingly and try to prevent a high or a low blood sugar. One thing I always want to stress with my patients is don't think that once you start an insulin pump, your high and low blood sugars will go away. You'll still have them, but Control IQ is trying to limit that and reduce it as much as possible. So anything above that 160 threshold, if it's predicted to go above 160 in 30 minutes, it gives you an increase in your basal rates. And then anything predicted above 180, it'll give you that more aggressive auto correction bolus. On the flip side, if it's predicted to go below the 112.5, it's going to decrease your basal rate. And below 70 in 30 minutes, it's going to suspend all insulin delivery until your glucose goes back up. So I really love that it has that tight control for you. And then, once you go into, tighter features, for example, there's that sleep activity and there's the exercise activity. Those are what I like to call safety nets in those particular situations. When you're sleeping, it's trying to keep you in a tighter range of 112.5 and 120. And then while you're exercising, 140 to 160. So very careful in those situations. It's trying to make sure you're safe and you're good, essentially. As we have said several times, lifestyle, we sleep at different times of the day, we exercise at different times of the day. So having these assistants to help you in those particular situations are very, very helpful. And it's all trying to increase your time in range, decrease your A1C to that target that you and your doctor may set for yourself.
Yeah, I want to get into those modes in just a second, but before we get there, tell us about the auto corrections. So how Tandem stands out ahead of some of the competition is it can send out auto boluses in addition to its basal adjustments that will they'll do it up to once an hour. It will treat with a burst of insulin in order to bring you down. What is it kind of doing there?
So when you're, for example, in the sleep mode, it shuts all auto corrections completely. And then when you're in the exercise mode, it does up to 1 per hour, just to prevent you from having a low while exercising. But having those correction boluses, sometimes obviously our glucose is rising a bit quicker, through our pattern and our trend that the Dexcom is displaying, it might show we are rising pretty quickly. And based on the settings we input into our device is going to give us those correction boluses as a more aggressive dose versus your basal rate, because your basal rate can only go up to a certain amount based on your max basal rate. Um, so, let's say you're running high for several hours. The pump is working super hard to try to bring you down with those increased basal rates. But once it hits that max, it's going to, almost tap out. It can't do beyond that. So that's where the correction boluses come in. And, with that algorithm, it's predicting above 180 in 30 minutes. If it continues to notice that pattern, it's going to deliver the correction bolus. It takes into account, your insulin on board and when was the last time you bolused, things like that. But it is there to assist beyond those basal rates if needed.
So one thing I noticed using the Mobi that kind of scared me was that if I was having a low, like a minor low around 70 or going low, if I was going to eat, say, 50 grams of carbs, I would enter that in and the app would still recommend me taking insulin. Whereas I felt like when I used, not even when I used the Omnipod 5 system, when I was at that same amount, it would not allow me to even if I put in 50 grams of carbs, it wouldn't allow me to take
Yeah.
insulin for that. What's the difference here? It scared me when Mobi was like, "No, you should have more insulin." I'm like, "No, I'm low."
Yeah, I mean, it's going to obviously drop the amount of insulin you may require because it is seeing that your blood sugar is low and it may be continuing to drop. You do have that option to, as soon as you go in and type a bolus, it'll say you're either above or below your target glucose of 110. And if you want that correction, obviously you would click yes, and it will drop the amount of insulin if you are low, for example. I get it. There is that fear that maybe you don't want insulin in you while you're going low, which by all means, obviously, you shouldn't. But it gives you that option, and it just shows that you can take a lower amount of insulin just because of the fact that simply you're low. Obviously, maybe you want to treat a little bit before you initiate a bolus, because also when your glucose starts to rise back up, you'll notice the amount of insulin the pump wants to deliver will now be a little bit more because it sees your glucose is going back up. Um, so those are just things to consider. Obviously, you have the option to override the correction or take it if needed. But yeah, by all means, you have that ability. I know Omnipod, you're saying, would not give you insulin until it senses your glucose going back up. Tandem just gives you that option, but it's still something that you don't have to do. It's just not going to completely shut it down, essentially.
I also noticed that my Mobi would send me an alert that I was going low well before my Dexcom would, and maybe 50% of the time that Mobi told me I was going to go low, I actually didn't.
Okay.
Have you ever noticed that with your system, that Mobi's like you're going to go low and then you actually don't wind up going low? And Dexcom never alerts you that you are, because they're obviously using different algorithms, but it was interesting. Like, it was just adding another alert that I didn't even wind up
Absolutely.
needing.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about. And I think sometimes because you're getting those alerts, yes, it can be a lot sometimes, but Mobi is, remember, able to predict up to 30 minutes into the future. So with those predictions, it's trying to alert you and make it seem more intense than maybe it actually will end up being. But with those safety nets, it's decreasing basal or it's suspending basal. That is when you may end up just leveling out. So yeah, there have been times where I would get alerts like that, and it looks like I'm going to have a pretty low blood sugar, but then I'll let 5-10 minutes pass maybe in that process and then see I ended up flattening out. And I primarily attribute that to the algorithm, not treating with maybe carbs, because I feel having less insulin going into my system is what is going to help me from crashing. And so, yes, those scenarios do happen, but it is nice that you have that second set of eyes essentially through the Mobi to give you those alerts, but also to prevent the insulin.
Yeah. I kind of got into this a lot before about wearing a tube pump, it being so new, and in all these areas of my life, it being kind of annoying. Are there any tricks that you use to hold on to your tube pump in all these areas of life?
So with the T Slim, because it was a little bit bigger, I would just clip it usually on the back, my back pocket. And then sometimes, if depending on what I was wearing at the time, if it was probably something a little more more comfortable, like sweats, I might just clip it to the front of my waistband. Now with the Mobi, because it's small, I mean, I'm wearing it right now and I honestly don't feel it on me. I don't know where it is at the moment because of how discreet it is. So I usually clip it actually um, onto my underwear waistband, and then there's still that layer of my pants over it. But I feel it's more discreet this way, so I just clip it on there, and the tubing is kind of hanging out, but it's not really in the way this way. Obviously, we don't want anything covering the pump too much because that can obstruct connection with the Dexcom. But I personally haven't noticed anything with signal loss or anything like that. So I find that works for me. You're talking about tips and tricks for maybe clipping the pump a particular way. One thing that I found to be quite helpful, I actually learned from another educator I worked with, is you can actually put the Mobi on the clip backwards, essentially, or upside down. And this allows any bubbles that may form to go to the top of the reservoir or the cartridge rather than the bottom, which is where the insulin starts to be pushed out of. This way, you're preventing any bubbles from going into your tubing and missing a delivery of insulin. So I find that if I notice I filled the cartridge and maybe there was one bubble I missed, um, it's not the end of the world, but it is pretty hard to get out at that point. So what I'll do is just put the pump upside down and clip it on, and it seems to work.
Yeah, this having bubbles in a cartridge, this was the first time I've ever had to
Yeah.
deal with that. Can you explain to us what happens when there is a bubble in the cartridge? And with Omnipod, like, is it possible that there are bubbles in an Omnipod, or does it get those out? Like, you can't see it.
Exactly.
I've never thought about it like
Yeah,
that.
I mean, for example, with the Omnipod, yes, you can't really see the quote unquote cartridge inside the pod, but keep in mind the insulin is going, or any bubbles are going more to the top of the cartridge essentially, or where the cannula will be placed. So, depending on the placement of the pod, it can push that bubble to the top if you're wearing the cannula facing down, for example. Similar to the Mobi, if you're placing that cartridge facing down, then the bubble is going to go up. Um, so it's basically a pressure change when we fill our syringe with insulin and insert that into the cartridge. There are bubbles that can form. We always say you don't want to fill your insulin pump with cold insulin because that can cause pressure change. It can allow bubbles to form. And so if you're filling it with room temperature insulin, you're less likely to have bubbles form. And then if you still do, the bubbles will form, but it's important that they don't collect towards the opening of the tubing because that is going to potentially block insulin delivery. And that would just mean you're not getting your full dose, which could result in a high blood sugar. So that's why we always stress flicking out your bubbles as much as you can. The positioning can really help with that. There are different tactics we can do, but it is important to reduce the amount of bubbles.
Okay, thank you for that. That I learned something new. I didn't know that stuff, and I've been filling my pump up with cold insulin too, so I'll make sure to let those sit out in room temperature a
Yeah.
little longer. Today's episode is sponsored by T1D Exchange. You can directly make an impact on diabetes healthcare, treatments, and technology by participating in the T1D Exchange registry. It starts with a simple survey about your life with T1D, and it only takes about 15 minutes. After that, you'll have a personal portal with ongoing T1D study and survey opportunities. Plus, some of these studies even offer compensation. Signing up with the link in the show notes helps support my channel, and it allows me to continue putting out free content. You can sign up at t1dexchange.org/diabetic or click that link in today's show notes. So let's go into the modes a little deeper. Let's start with activity mode. So one thing I needed to do with activity mode was like activity mode alone did not work for when I did like intense cardio. When I was running at maybe 5 to 8 miles per hour, fluctuating between there, or whenever I go low. And with activity mode, that alone would not do the trick. I would need to put on a temp basal ahead of that. And luckily with Control IQ Plus, you can now do that. What are your kind of tips and tricks when people are, or for using activity mode for people in different situations?
Definitely. So I get that question a lot, especially with new pump starts. This is a very new concept if they're starting a pump for the first time. So when we do a deep dive on the activity mode, basically, like I said, that is trying to bump up your target glucose to 140 to 160. So you're getting a little bit less insulin this way, up to 1 correction bolus per hour. I usually say starting it about an hour before your actual activity begins can help the algorithm start working in your system, bumping up that target glucose. So you go in with a bit of a higher glucose to basically allow for some breathing room if that activity decides to, make your glucose drop a little. You're already bumped up a little bit, so you'll have that safety net. I usually notice, personally, when I use activity mode, so I think I've shared with you before, but I am a local to Disneyland, so I love going there all the time. And, obviously you're walking a lot, it's a big park. And so I pretty much will set my exercise mode every single time I go. Depending on how soon, usually I forget and I'll just turn it on maybe as I'm leaving the parking lot and walking into the park. But I oftentimes find I don't have as many low blood sugars, if any, because I'm in that mode. I already know I'm going to be more active. Depending on the weather, it could be warm that day. Hot weather can, sometimes make my blood sugar drop a little. So I'm already, taking all of that into account. I find that activity mode really helps because I'm more active that way. A lot of times I'll ask my patients, are there any particular activities you like to do? They might like to swim, they go for walks, they will, play baseball, things like that. So I say, great, well then let's utilize activity mode and just make sure you're turning that on about an hour before. And then that is one feature that you will also have to manually go in and turn off. So I always say if you want to maybe set a reminder on your phone or go in and turn that off if you can remember, but you don't want to keep it on too long after because then you're still getting that bumped up target glucose.
Yeah, I wish they would just introduce a timer for that. For both, they have it for sleep mode essentially, right? With the sleep schedules. Why don't they have an activity mode like timer? Like it's the perfect thing. It's the thing we really need. I mean, you even have that with temp basal now in automated mode. I mean, you get it with kind of everything. We should get it in activity mode for sure, because those are the times where you're like, okay, I'm gonna go run errands for a couple hours. Let me put this on, and let me tell you, running errands. That is like this feature might as well be called errand mode, because running errands, oh my goodness. If you're like at it, you're shopping, you're going from place to place, like you can drop low. I was low in line for a dressing room the other day because we were just like bopping around from store to store.
The other day, someone asked me, well, what if I'm cleaning the house or doing laundry and, I'm, reaching into my laundry basket and pulling out something to fold, or, things like that. There's a lot of movement in that. And a lot of times they might find themselves going low. Well, I say, let's try exercise mode, or activity mode. And if you find that maybe that is helping prevent those low blood sugars, then there's your answer. You can use that for instances like that.
Yeah, Swiffering. Let me tell you, when I Swiffer, I get my
Yeah,
back into that, and I've probably gone low 50% of the times I've
sure.
Swiffered.
Yeah. No, that can definitely happen. I don't I completely
Yeah.
know what you're talking about. Even a lot of times people will say vacuuming will do that, or simply just cleaning your house. Yep.
Yep. And it's not always, it's not the simple act of Swiffering. It's the fact that maybe I ate lunch an hour before and took a little more insulin than I should have, whatever. And then that in combination with the action that you're putting into with the Swiffer, it's like that's all you needed to go low.
Definitely.
So now with sleep mode, are there ways you're having people use sleep mode outside of sleep? Are there other parts of life where this could be a good that could be a good moment for people to
Yeah.
use it?
Um, I think, obviously we want to try to use it only for the sleeping hours, but, for example, there was a time, I'll give you a personal example where there was a period of time where I was having low blood sugars left and right, did not know what was taking place. And I brought that up to my endocrinologist, and we decided, well, let's go in sleep mode 100% of the time, because you're still, in a tighter range, but you're not getting those correction boluses. So you might get a little bit less insulin to try to bump up your blood sugar and prevent those lows from happening. And I used it until it stopped working, essentially. I used it for a couple of months, was doing great. And then I noticed my insulin needs changed. And now I was facing high blood sugar. So I said, well, then let's turn off sleep mode now so I can get those correction boluses. So that would be maybe a time. Obviously, I always tell patients, when you decide to use a feature like that outside of what it's intended for, then let's bring that to your endocrinologist, because they essentially have the final say. But there are ways to basically manipulate the system, or optimize it fully by using it in other scenarios than what they are intended for.
Gotcha. Yeah, I have sleep mode set to start at 3 a.m. now. I used to have it start maybe around 11, which is more true to when I was
Mhm.
going to sleep. But the issue I found with that for me was that I do late night snacking, or I'll eat dinner a little late around 9. And I found that because sleep mode came on just 2 hours after that meal, especially if it was the high fat meal, I was going pretty high a couple hours into sleep mode, and I didn't have those auto correction boluses to get me
Yeah,
down fast enough. So then sleep mode would spend forever trying to get me down through basal, and it didn't do a good job. It would take until 4 or 6 a.m. for me to get back into range, which was really bad. What are you seeing there with patients? What are your kind of go-to strategies with the time that sleep mode goes
yeah.
on and people's like routines?
Definitely. I think I usually ask patients first, what are your typical sleeping hours? Depending on where they are in life, maybe they are a working adult, or maybe they are retired, their sleep schedules are going to change, obviously. So usually tell them you have up to two sleep schedules. You can set maybe a weekday profile and a weekend profile if you want, or you can do every single day the same sleep schedule. Then I'll ask them, what time do you typically go to bed? What time do you typically wake up? And then we'll come up with, if they say, oh, some nights maybe 7, some nights maybe 9, we'll say, let's come up with an average. Let's do 8. And then it'll just start to kick in, with the option that they can also just go in and automatically, or manually turn on that sleep mode. And then same thing, when they wake up, they can turn it off if they want. I think it's a very smart, option that you just shared about maybe setting it to start later into the night, because yes, you are going to be, getting rid of those correction boluses. So if you know that you are somebody who may be snacking late, eating dinner late, depending on what your diet looks like too, if you mentioned you have something a little bit higher fat potentially, then you may need those correction boluses. You may need a little bit more insulin because, as I'm sure both of us are aware of, something like pizza, it's going to hit you several hours later. And so if you have pizza one night and then your sleep mode goes on a couple of hours after, you may end up having some high blood sugar. You may not, but it is helpful to set that sleep mode maybe later then. So I always just kind of try to meet that patient in the middle where they're at and try to assess what does their typical nighttime routine look like and how would sleep mode fit into that.
Let's talk a little bit about Control IQ Plus. So this released in the US a couple months ago. It's not outside the US just yet, but it is with government agencies for in preparation for clearance. First, one of the big updates was the temp basal, and not just temp basal when you're outside of automated, but now when you're in automated insulin delivery, you can have that temp basal up to 72 hours. Tell us a little bit about what temp basal is and the different ways that people can now use it in automated mode.
Basically, temp basal is a new feature, as you just shared, to Tandem, and especially when you're on that Control IQ algorithm. So now with Control IQ Plus, what's nice is you can basically get your standard basal rates. Usually you're at 100%. Depending on if your glucose is above or below target, you may get a little bit less or more, but the pump would do that for you. But say you're normally in 100% getting your basal rates, standard basal rates. Now you have the option to go as low as 0% and up to 250%, which means say you are, for example, running higher one day. Maybe you're sick, or you have a cold, flu, things like that, where your blood sugars will be a little bit more stubborn. You may have higher blood sugar. You can bump up your temporary basal rate to be a little bit more than that 100% range. You could get 150, 200, you name it. And then same thing, if you're noticing you're running low one day, maybe you're more active, you're a little bit more sensitive to insulin, you can decrease that temporary basal rate. And so again, it's a safety net. Just yesterday, I was having a lot of low blood sugars, and I had a very busy day where I really couldn't stop too much, and I also was getting tired of popping glucose tabs. So I said, let's go ahead and put a temporary basal rate. So I did that for about an hour and a half, and I decreased that, and I noticed it helped. I noticed my blood sugars were doing just fine, and then as soon as that timer ended, essentially, that's when I noticed my glucose was starting to shift up or down. So it was pretty eye-opening how powerful that can be, and it is a new feature, a new tool that you can now incorporate.
It's so funny just like hearing you talk about that and this whole conversation we're having with all of these different features and knobs that you can turn and make like increase or decrease things. Like so many people who don't have diabetes have no idea all the
Yep.
tinkering that goes into managing diabetes. They're just like, oh, they have an insulin pump, they're fine. Like we have the temp basal, the extended bolus, we have this, that. We have all these features for adjusting our pancreas needs. It's just so funny. Another one of those features is extended bolus, which now there's been updates to that. The fact that you can extend a bolus in automated insulin up to, I think it's
Up to
8 hours.
yes.
How are you using these yourself?
So extended bolus, I personally don't use it too often, but the times I do are when I'm having maybe a higher carb, high fat, content meal, something like pizza, of course. That's the time I would normally use it. So that's basically just to give a summary of what extended bolus is for those who may not know. It's basically you can take a percentage of your total bolus for a meal up front, and then a percentage, the remaining percentage can hit a couple of hours later, up to 8 hours, as you said. So it used to be before Control IQ Plus, you could only go up to 2 hours. Now you have up to 8. And we can get a little bit more into why would you necessarily need to use it up to 8 hours later. But um, essentially, you would maybe say you're taking, 100% of your total bolus, but you decide I'm going to have a slice or two of pizza. Maybe I'm going to take 30% of my bolus now and the remaining 70% 2, 3 hours later, usually when that spike hits from something with high fat, high protein, high fat, high carb content meal. So that is a time I would say would be great to use it. Obviously, depending on particular needs and diets, everybody has a different lifestyle. They may want to use it for other meals. It's not just for something like pizza. But that is a time you would essentially use it when you know your spike is going to hit you several hours later.
Yeah, and you were saying for up to 8 hours. Is that for people who have gastroparesis, like slow
Pretty
digestion?
much, yeah. That's probably what we'll start seeing, who will be using it more. Obviously, that is a very new feature. And at first, when a lot of us heard it can go up to 8 hours, maybe we thought, why would anyone want a bolus to hit them 8 hours later? But when you really break it down, it is for things that are a little bit more individualized, something like gastroparesis, yes. So I think over time with this new feature, we'll start to see who is actually utilizing it and when would it be most beneficial.
I want to ask you a few things about the future of
Yeah.
Tandem Mobi. And I'm going to split this up. So, first, if you could have any feature on the physical side of Mobi, any dream feature, what would that
Mm.
be physically?
Physically, okay. I would probably say maybe having like a built-in clip, but something that would just pop in and out. So if you decide you don't want a clip, you can just pop it back in. But for those who do, it would just simply pop out, stick to that same slim profile without having to add an extra component like the clip we have now. I will say the clip we have now is pretty thin, but I know some people may feel it's still a little bit clunky for their liking. So maybe having the option to pop in a clip and pop it back out as needed would be beneficial for those moments where maybe they're wearing it as a patch pump or not wearing it as a patch pump. They have options, but it's all built in.
Yeah, almost like the Nintendo Switch. The Nintendo Switch has like a stand that
Yes.
pulls out and then clips back in and goes into the form
Okay.
factor. Also, the fact that when the Mobi is in its clip, you can't
Yes.
charge it.
So maybe that would help. Something with a built-in clip could help with charging, for example. Yeah.
Yeah, I also just find it funny that the clip was designed in a way that you can't charge it. I think that there's some room there for updates on the future model, because this charges on a pad. It's all wirelessly charged. Which, by the way, having to bring a wireless charger and the idea of forgetting your wireless charger adds like a whole other aspect of like packing your diabetes supplies that I already messed up with going on a little weekend vacation. I didn't bring my charger. And luckily, it lived. Okay, now on a software angle, what area of the software? What's a feature for the software that you would love to see come to the system?
Personally, I'm very happy with the features that are available. I find that they all work great. You can utilize them as needed. But first thing that comes to mind is actually what we talked about a little earlier, where having maybe a timer for the activity mode would be helpful. I would say that is just beneficial because there will be times where we forget, maybe we're running from the gym over to work and we just completely forget to turn that feature back off maybe a few hours later, and then we'll realize, well, our blood sugar is high, how come? And you find that you're still in activity mode. So I think from a practical standpoint, things like reminders or timers would be helpful because people with diabetes, we're busy people too. So we have to, have as much help as possible within our system.
Yeah, I forgot to bring up mine. So with the form factor, I would love to see the ability to turn on suspend bolus from the the button on it. Because every time I have to shower, the fact that I have to go find my phone to suspend bolus, no, I'd prefer to just use the onboard button to suspend bolus. I'm sure there's a certain way characters that they can create on there to do that. With software wise, what I would like to see is I'm already creating these like temp basals plus activity feature turned on at the same time. I wish that there was the ability to create customizable widgets that you could just tap, and what it does is it turns on that temp basal and activity feature. It turns on sleep mode and temp basal. It's, whatever it is, these like custom made presets would be great, and they're not adding a feature. They're really just allowing you to more quickly activate some of the settings. Now, lastly, if there was a dream feature that you could see come to the algorithm, what would that be?
Maybe I would say going to the ability for the pump itself to predict your blood sugar 30 minutes into the future and correct based on that. I think it would be nice if we could see what those predictions would be. What is the algorithm assuming we might end up at? And why is it deciding to increase or decrease our basal rate? So maybe just giving us a little more information, but in an optional format. I know a lot of times people have alarm fatigue and all these constant beeps and reminders can be a lot. So having it be optional would be great, but the ability to tap in and see what are these predictions and what is my basal rate being based off of? Why is it increasing and why is it decreasing? I think that would be pretty eye-opening for sure.
Yeah, that would be great. I could definitely see it being TMI for some people, but on some open source apps, they do show that. They do show where your glucose is going. In fact, actually, the twist pump that's coming out, which uses an algorithm from the open source community, that software does show you where your glucose is going, which is exciting. I believe it shows you a 6-hour graph. I think that the first 2 hours are where your glucose already was, and then the next 4 hours are where they're going. So that's exciting. People will have that feature on Twist coming out. And I wanted to end with this. If someone's considering becoming a certified diabetes educator, what would your advice be to them?
That's a great question, actually. I think obviously I've noticed in my experience living with diabetes, but also working in the diabetes field, people with diabetes have this sense of passion for helping others with diabetes. And I think that is a very important trait to obtain, to have. Um, I would say if you're open to the idea or research, how can I get to that point? Obviously, there are specific pathways that you do have to go through before you would qualify to become a CDCES. But having that ability can be very beneficial because there are different routes you can take within that as well. You can do it from the dietetic standpoint, you can do that from the technology standpoint. There are a lot of different avenues, nursing. And so I think, I would just say do your research, get involved, work with others living with diabetes, volunteer, get some experience, and from that point forward, move next to that educational piece to get certified. But it all comes down to passion. I think you have to obviously have that passion to help others, which I feel people with diabetes naturally do. So, I would just say go with your gut and move forward. If it's in you, move forward with that.
Yeah, we really do have this passion. The community's incredible, and so many people have helped me on my journey, whether that be in an endo office or just on chat rooms or social media. And it continues to inspire what I do, and to create this kind of content to help educate others. Dave, thank you so much for coming on. I'm glad that we got to do this. I'm so glad you could tell me everything I need to know about Mobi before I return
Thank you so much.
But also, I think people listening will, really grab a lot from
Great, great.
this.
Well, that is the hope. But thank you so much for having me. This was really cool. And yeah, honored to speak with you here.
Thanks for listening. I've got so much more on Tandem Mobi coming out, so make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel and make sure you are signed up for our newsletter on diabetech.info. That is www.diabetech.info. You can get signed up for our newsletter and check out all of our blog posts coming out, which are like the latest and greatest in diabetes tech news. I'm Justin, and I'll see you next week.